who were some of the big risers in your rankings this week?
Okay, yeah. So I do write an article about this that comes out on Wednesdays. And some of the names in there include Anthony Vulpi, who, if you remember last week, I was struggling to move him ahead of Xander Bogaerts and Dansby Swanson, higher floor players. I went ahead and did that now. I moved Volpe ahead of them. I moved him ahead of Nico Horner and Ha-Sung Kim because, you know, it looks like he's just as much of a base stealer as those latter two. And now, you know, a week ago we were concerned about the exit velocities. They've kind of caught up to the production as opposed to the production regressing to the exit velocities. Volpe's been hitting the ball much harder. He's moved up to the leadoff spot ahead of Soto and Judge, which is a great place to hit. And so I have him as my number 11 shortstop now. I think this breakout is true for him. Michael Busch, I moved him up to 11th at third base, position that's had a lot of injuries so far. He's 15th or 16th at first base. So you see the difference between those two positions there. But that means he's ahead of like Alec Boehm and Ke'Bryan Hayes and that group, but behind like Josh Naylor and Vinny Pasquantino, but not by much. That's Michael Busch. Westburg, Jordan Westburg, who we've talked about a lot lately, and
Yes.
I've had to.
Yes,
I've tried to. What's the word I'm looking for?
Poo-poo.
No. No, I've tried to clarify my stance on Jordan Westburg. That like, oh yeah, he could be a decent fantasy option. I just don't think he's going to be like a top 10. And I didn't move him in the top 10. I moved him in the top 15 at second base. I moved him in the top 20 at third base, hitting the ball hard, great lineup, all of that. And Colton Cower is 29th in my outfield rankings. So I mentioned in the article that I have Colton Cower 29th. I moved Taylor Ward up to 35th, which seems pretty close, but the guys right ahead of Colton Cower are Nick Castellanos and George Springer. So fantasy stalwarts who are going to remain in that range through all their ups and downs. While the two players ahead of Taylor Ward 6 spots later are Christopher Morel and Riley Green, two interesting players, but not established enough to be rooted there. So I think what I'm suggesting is I think Colton Cower is at the precipice of something greater, of becoming a stalwart in fantasy himself, while Ward might just be the hot starter among a very elastic group of outfielders, and you shouldn't buy into him as heavily. So those are some of my risers for this week.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting the way you explained that, because I actually moved Colton Cower up to outfield 36, but he's just behind Lourdes Gurriel and Taylor Ward. So I kind of took the opposite approach there, just because Gurriel's off to a great start, and I think it's something that could be sustainable for him, and just hitting third in that lineup that looks like a really, really good D-backs lineup this year. And obviously Taylor Ward, everything he's done, but I could definitely hear your argument for Colton Cower being higher in the rankings as well. Chris, let's move over to you. Who are some of the big rankings risers for you?
I have moved Colton Cower, Volpe, Westburg, and Busch up quite a bit. So not quite to the same spots across the board. I have Volpe, I think, 12th or 13th at shortstop. So I'm not quite buying in as much. Love what we've seen so far from him. So the guys I wanted to highlight, Mike Trout is a tough one because the biggest question is one that we cannot get an answer to until the end of the season. And that's kind of a cop-out, but the biggest question for Mike Trout is, can he stay healthy? But he looks like the MVP version of Mike Trout again. He had his 8th home run today, has 3 stolen bases. That is his most since 2019. I will remind everyone, It is April.
Yeah.
Not even the end of April. There's still almost 2 weeks left of April. So I do think if you told me Mike Trout was going to play 95% of the games the rest of the way, 90% of the games the rest of the way, I think he's a first rounder based on what we've seen so far this season. So I can't move him that high, but he is, I think, outfielder 13 for me in Roto now.
Frank and I have him 10th.
Okay, so I'm not quite as high. Look at that.
No, you like Randy Arozarena and
Adolis Garcia. I would guess you don't have ahead of him as well, right?
Adolis Garcia and Michael Harris. Those are the three that we have Trout ahead of.
I moved Trout up right to a point where if I move him any higher, then I'm making some drastic changes in my rankings. Because
you're moving him into the first round candidate. You're up to Jordan Alvarez if you go higher than 10th.
It would be, I mean, just ahead of him in points, I have Julio Rodriguez, Judge, Tatis. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think like
not just yet, not yet, but
I think on a per game basis, he's very likely to be better than Michael Harrison and Randy Arozarena and Adolis Garcia. It's just I can't just knock the injury concerns out completely, given how much time he's missed. But I can't disagree with you guys putting him there either. I moved Tyler O'Neill up quite a bit, as has everyone. I think he is. It's definitely like in the top 120.
You have him overall. 30, we're almost exactly the same. You have him 31st. Frank has him 31st. I have him 30th. These are Roto rankings, by the way. We have head-to-head points rankings too. But.
And Roto is Tyler O'Neill's best format by far. His plate discipline's not great. So those are three hitters that I moved up. Do we want to get into the pitchers now? I know
we haven't talked about any pitchers. I just skipped over mine in the rundown here.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So I moved Zach Gallen back up because I had been a little skeptical of him coming into the season, a little skeptical in the early going when his velocity was down, which it's remained down pretty consistently. But
it's been getting better. No, it's been getting better with you.
It's been getting a little better, and the whiffs have been really good. The knuckleball and the knuckle curve and the slider have been huge whiff pitches for him. The strikeout rate is actually would be a career high right now. Walk rate right where it needs to be. So I have still some lingering doubts. I've moved him up to 7th at starting pitcher, which might be a little too low. And I think you could make a case that he deserves to be ahead of Kevin Gausman, to name one. I think that's the one that if I was going to make a more dramatic move, that could be one that I would do. But he's moved up a couple spots for me. Jared Jones, like we talked about yesterday, he is SP26 for me in Roto. I'm the high guy on him, but I know, Frank, you have him like 30th, right?
28th.
And then Scott has him a little lower. Got to be a little more aggressive, Scott. Don't be afraid of Jared Jones. Let him into your heart.
I didn't know we were allowed to move him that high.
He's the Spencer Strider replacement we've been looking for. Yeah. No, look, I talked about it yesterday.
A little ahead of where I have Garrett Crochet.
Yeah, I moved him to right behind Joe Ryan, who has risen a little bit, but didn't rise for me this week. But he's been really impressive so far. I can't really justify Jared Jones ahead of Joe Ryan. I know that there's downside there, but there might be downside with or Jared Jones, that we haven't seen. It doesn't help that they both have alliterative names. So maybe I'm just going to make that mistake moving forward. Another alliterative name, Mason Miller, who is a difficult player to rank right now because it's kind of the opposite of Garrett Crochet, where you can only rank him at starting pitcher in our tool, at least for 2 more appearances, I believe. But and I don't know. If you told me he was going to save 30 games, I might have him as a top 5 closer. Told me he was going to save 25 games, he might be top 10. And maybe that's just where he needs to be, because I think Mason Miller is absolutely one of the best relievers in baseball right now. I'd rather have him than Tanner Scott, certainly. I think I'd rather have him than Craig Kimbrell, although Kimbrell's going to get a lot more saves, so that's a tough one.
I moved Kimbrell up to 7th.
I haven't moved him up that much.
He's been great. He looks like good Kimbrell.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of stretches of good Kimbrell, and then bad Kimbrell comes around.
Yeah,
again.
But you look at his numbers over the last 3 years. They're actually
I think he's good. I just think Mason Miller's a better
he has
pitcher.
more job security than he's had since he was with the Red Sox, probably. Orioles are great.
I just think Mason Miller's a better pitcher than him right now.
There's the athletics thing with Mason Miller. That's a problem, of course. You got to think he's a major injury risk too. Absolutely, I understand it's a lesser role than he's had in the past, but throwing 102, 3, 4 miles per hour and never having stayed healthy for long. It may not matter what role he's in ultimately.
Sure. Absolutely. people got mad at me on Twitter because I said he's a failed starter, and like that, I don't. That's just objectively true. It's not a knock on him.
Accepted language for relievers for about 20 years now, so I don't know why
nobody got mad when I said that Michael
is a
Kopech
failed starter, basically.
Yeah. And then three lefties that we've talked a ton about who've risen a lot in my rankings: Reed Detmers, Yusei Kikuchi, and Nick Lodolo are all. I think they're all top 50 for me now. They're all top 50. They're 48, 49, and 50. Right behind Mason Miller, actually, because again, he's a weird pitcher to rank. But I really like those guys. I really love what we've seen from Mackenzie Gore, Bryce Miller. Those guys have all risen up my rankings a lot in the early going.
I do want to mention I have Max Scherzer 40th now.
I'm struggling with Max Scherzer. I feel like I have him way too low.
It's always difficult to rank injured players, and he was an afterthought in drafts, basically. And now he's talking about being back in early May.
Yeah.
So.
No, I need to move him up, yeah. At least to where Garrett Cole is, because he probably is going to beat Garrett Cole. I think Garrett Cole will be better if he stays healthy, but yeah, that's a good call.
Yeah. So I have Lodolo 45th, but it gets tough in that range because I kind of like Lodolo over Shota Imanaga and Christian Javier, both of whom I consider sell high candidates. I had an article about that earlier this week. But
I think Javier is one of the toughest players to rank right now.
That 40 to 55 range and that starting pitcher is really difficult.